Hello, everyone, and welcome to something brand new here on the Senior Spinner channel. If you've watched this channel for a while, you know that a lot of what I do revolves around the music I grew up with, the top 40, the old Billboard charts, classic records, and of course, everything on vinyl. But something interesting has been happening since I started this. I'm finding a deep appreciation for other types of music. So I've been deliberately trying to expand my musical horizons. For most of my life, my musical comfort zone was primarily pop and rock, especially the music from the 50s through the 90s. But the more music I've listened to, the more I've discovered genres that I either ignored when I was younger or simply never gave much of a chance. I developed a real appreciation for jazz. I've been listening to more blues and R&B. I've discovered some country that I really enjoy, along with bluegrass, folk, Americana, soul, and all kinds of music that probably wouldn't have made it onto my turntable years ago. And that led me to another discovery. There is an incredible amount of music being released on vinyl every single week. Not just new albums from current artists either. There are new artists, established artists, reissues, anniversary editions, albums being pressed on vinyl for the first time, limited editions, and recordings from decades ago being brought back into circulation. So every week, I get a list of the upcoming vinyl releases and I go through it. All of it. This week, 374 releases. Now, obviously, I'm not listening to 374 albums. I've developed my own filtering system. And since this is the Senior Spinner Show, naturally I had to give it a name. I call it the Lewd filter. And no, not that kind of lewd. L stands for loud. I'm just not a fan of extremely loud or aggressive music. Heavy metal, punk, really hard rock, that sort of thing normally gets filtered out. E stands for explicit. I'm not bothered by an occasional explicit word in a song, but if an album has more than 2 tracks marked explicit, I generally eliminate it from consideration. W stands for weird, and admittedly, this one is completely subjective. Electronic sounds, ambient noise, nature recordings, some goth, and highly experimental music. If I listen to it and find myself wondering exactly what I'm listening to, chances are it's going into the W pile. And finally, D stands for doesn't fit. That doesn't mean the music is bad, simply means it doesn't fit my musical taste. Rap and hip hop, for example, aren't really my thing. Neither is classical music. There are millions of people who love those genres, but I'm probably not the guy you want recommending them. So after listening to clips and applying my lewd filter to this week's 374 vinyl releases, I was left with 28 albums that interested me. However, in interest of keeping the length of the show more manageable, I've selected 10 releases that I want to share with you this week. These aren't necessarily the 10 best albums being released. I couldn't possibly make that claim. They're simply the 10 that caught my attention. And that's really what this show is about. I'm looking for music I might otherwise never have discovered. And maybe I'll find something that you might never have discovered either. I'll put the other 18 albums that made my initial cut in the description below in case you're curious about what else caught my attention. Now, one other thing about how I'm doing this. As much as I tout the superiority of the vinyl listening experience, I'm certainly not going to purchase 10 new vinyl records every week. I'd go broke. So my normal process is to sample the music first. If I like what I hear enough, I'll purchase the album digitally. That lets me spend some real time with it. And if I find an album that I really enjoy, then I might decide that it deserves a place in my physical record collection. Around here, we're going to call that a vinyl-worthy album. So next week, I'll be able to come back and tell you which of those albums I actually purchased, what I thought after hearing the entire album, and whether any of them earned that vinyl-worthy designation. All right, that's enough explaining. Let's get into the music. Here are 10 releases that caught the Senior Spinner's ear this week. I'm going to start with one that surprised me. Black Marble is essentially the musical project of Chris Stewart, and it's been around since 2012. Stewart came out of the New York synthwave scene, and Black Marble's music is built around synthesizers and electronic instruments, which if you've been paying attention, might make you wonder how this one survived the W in my lewd filter. But here's why. When I started sampling Life in Small Spaces, I didn't hear electronic music simply for the sake of electronic music. What I heard reminded me of the new wave music of the 1980s. There were elements that immediately made me think of bands like The Cure and Depeche Mode, and that caught my attention. Life in Small Spaces is a genuinely new album released August 21st with 11 tracks. Stewart continues to write and record Black Marble largely as a singular musical vision, and this album arrives roughly 14 years after the project began. There's a dark, somewhat atmospheric quality to the music, but underneath it are melodies that feel strangely familiar if you spent any time listening to alternative or new wave music in the 1980s. This is exactly the kind of record I wanted this show to help me find. Next is a name that a lot more people will probably recognize. Brandon Flowers is best known, of course, as the lead singer of The Killers. But Thrasher isn't a Killers album. This is Flowers' third solo album and his first solo record in more than a decade. And here's what interested me. He's gone country. Not completely abandoning the melodic pop sensibility he's known for, but Thrasher leans heavily into traditional country and Americana. The record was made at the historic RCA Studio A in Nashville and includes some serious Nashville musicians. David Rawlings plays guitar, Bruce Booton contributes pedal steel, and Charlie McCoy, a legendary Nashville session musician who played harmonica on Bob Dylan's Nashville recordings, is here as well. The subject matter also gets personal. Flowers draws on his childhood growing up in the small town of Nephi, Utah, and the album moves into themes involving family, spirituality, memory, and American life. When I sampled this one, what struck me was the combination of country instrumentation with a strong male pop vocal. Didn't sound like somebody simply putting on a cowboy hat and pretending to make a country record. There seemed to be some substance around it. And because I'm increasingly finding country music that I enjoy, this became an easy selection for my final 10. This next artist was a new discovery for me. Chris Pierce is a singer-songwriter whose music sits somewhere around folk, blues, Americana, and soul, and he's been doing this for quite a long time. Pierce has shared stages with some pretty impressive names, including B.B. King, Al Green, Neil Young, Steve Earle, Aaron Neville, and the Blind Boys of Alabama. Neil Young personally invited Pierce to open dates on his coastal tour, and Pierce also co-wrote We Can Always Come Back to This, which was featured on the television series This Is Us, and reached #1 on Billboard's blues charts. His new album is called Songs for the Heavy-Hearted. When I sampled it, two things immediately grabbed me. First was the sound. Country and Americana mixed with blues, and then the harmonica comes through. That's an instrument that can get my attention very quickly when it's used well. But the second thing was the lyrics. There seems to be some thought behind these songs. This isn't just background music. Pierce has built a reputation for songwriting that deals with the human experience pretty directly. And even from the songs I sampled, I found myself paying attention to what he was actually saying. That's something I'm increasingly looking for as I explore folk, blues, and Americana. Give me good instrumentation, but give me something to think about too. Chris Pierce and Songs for the Heavy-Hearted did both. Next up are Dan and Shay and their new album, Young. Dan Smyers and Shay Mooney have been making music together for more than a decade, and they're firmly established in that crossover era where contemporary country and pop meet. They've had plenty of success with that formula, but Young seems to be moving in a somewhat more personal direction. The album contains 10 tracks and deals with subjects including getting older, parenthood, faith, relationships, loss, and looking back at your younger self. One of the things I noticed immediately while sampling the album was the vocals. These two voices complement each other extremely well. And I think that's what separated this album from some of the other contemporary country releases I sampled. I'm still learning what I like and I don't like in modern country music, but I've discovered that I tend to respond to country that retains strong melody and vocals. Dan and Shay certainly provide that. There's enough country in the arrangement to keep it rooted there, but there's also enough pop accessibility that somebody like me who comes from a pop background has an easy doorway into the music. I think that's why Young caught my attention. Now we get our first album this week that requires a little explanation. Maren Morris' Hero: A Second Wind isn't an entirely new studio album. It's a 10th anniversary expansion of her breakthrough 2016 major label debut, Hero. And that original album was a pretty important record in modern country music. Hero reached #5 on the Billboard 200 and included songs like 80s Mercedes, Rich, and especially My Church. My Church won Morris a Grammy for Best Country Solo Performance and helped establish her as one of the major new voices in country music. 10 years later, she's revisiting the record. Hero, A Second Wind expands the original album with additional material, including two previously unreleased songs, We Can't Be Friends and Hot Liquor and Soft Rock, along with several original era demos. So why did I pick it? The answer is actually pretty simple: her voice. While sampling the album, I found Maren Morris very easy to listen to. There's certainly country here, but there's also substantial pop influence. And again, that seems to be one of the bridges that's helping me get further into country music. I'm not necessarily looking for the most traditional country record I can find. I'm looking for music that makes me want to hear another song. Maren Morris did that. And because this edition also lets me explore an album that was important 10 years ago while hearing some material that wasn't available on the original release, Hero made my final 10. Here's another one where the word new needs an asterisk. Robert Earl Keen's Ready for Confetti was originally released back in 2011. So I'm not discovering a brand new album here. I'm discovering an older record through a new vinyl release. And frankly, that's one of the things I love about going through these weekly vinyl lists. Robert Earl Keen is a Texas singer-songwriter with a reputation for storytelling and a style that moves through country, folk, Americana, and roots music. Ready for Confetti has 12 tracks, and what caught my attention while sampling it was that it didn't feel like stereotypical country. There's a beat to it. There's some blues influence. There's humor. And lyrically, Keen has that storyteller quality where you get the feeling there's an actual character or situation behind the song. The vinyl record for this release is confetti colored, so I actually already pre-ordered this as I'm curious to see how it looks. Next is probably one of the biggest names on this week's list. Sam Smith returns with their 5th studio album, Hazel Eyes. And this is very different from some of the other records I've talked about today. This is contemporary pop, but what attracted me was how relaxed much of the material sounded. Smith has one of those voices that can carry a song without needing a wall of production behind it, and Hazel Eyes appears to lean into that. The album is 12 tracks and was created with longtime collaborator Simon Aldred. It's also closely connected to Smith's life in New York and their relationship with fiancé Christian Cohen. In fact, Smith has described the album as something of a love letter to Cohen, whose hazel-colored eyes inspire the title. That gives the album a noticeably different emotional starting point than some of Smith's earlier music, which often dealt with heartbreak and unrequited love. What caught me when I sampled it was simply the mood. Relaxed, chill, pleasant vocals. Sometimes that's enough. Not every album needs to challenge me. Sometimes I want to put on a record, sit back, and enjoy the sound of somebody who can really sing. That's what I heard here. Now, this one was unexpected. Say Ferris, It Means Everything. The album originally came out in 1997, right in the middle of the third wave ska movement. Say Ferris came out of Orange County, California, with vocalist Monique Powell fronting a band that mixed ska, pop, rock, and swing, with a very noticeable horn section. The album became known in part for the band's energetic cover of Dexy Midnight Runners' Come On Eileen. But here's the remarkable part about this week's release. Nearly 30 years after the album originally appeared, It Means Everything is finally being released on vinyl for the first time. That's exactly the kind of thing I want these weekly lists to uncover. Now, I normally filter out punk, and Say Ferris sometimes gets classified as ska punk. But when I sampled this record, that's not what jumped out at me. I heard the horns, I heard the fast tempo, I heard swing, and most importantly, I heard fun. This music moves. There's brass all over it, there's energy without simply being loud for the sake of being loud, and it has an upbeat character that caught me almost immediately. So somehow, a ska punk album slipped through my lewd filter. But I think I'm going to be glad that this one got through. This might be the selection that most immediately sounded like something from another era. The Anthony Pauley Soul Orchestra is based in San Francisco and was founded by guitarist and songwriter Anthony Pauley back in 2007. And when they use the word orchestra, they weren't kidding. This is a 12-piece outfit featuring vocalist Willie Jordan, guitar, keyboards, bass, drums, and a 4-piece horn section: trumpet, trombone, tenor sax, baritone sax. Now you're speaking my language. The band takes its inspiration from the soul and blues records of the 1960s and 70s, and that was exactly what I heard when I started sampling What Can We Do? It sounded old, and I mean that as a compliment. There's a warmth and an arrangement style here that reminded me of classic soul recordings. Horns answering the vocalist, a real rhythm section, blues mixed into the soul, and a singer who sounds like he belongs in front of a band like this. The orchestra has been around for nearly 2 decades and has accumulated numerous Blues Music Award nominations along the way. What Can We Do continues their collaboration with Willie Jordan, whose background includes work with Elvin Bishop and John Lee Hooker. For somebody like me who's been increasingly exploring classic R&B, soul, and blues, this was almost impossible to pass up. And I'm going to finish this week's 10 by going way back. 100 years, in fact. The Skillet Lickers, and the album is appropriately titled 100 Years, 1926 to 2026. This is not a new band making retro music. These are the old recordings. Gid Tanner and his Skillet Lickers began recording for Columbia Records in Atlanta in 1926. We're talking about the very early days of commercially recorded country music. The group combined fiddle, guitar, and old-time string band music and became one of the important early acts in the development of what eventually became commercial country music. This Centennial collection brings together recordings including Bully of the Town, Pass Around the Bottle, and Old Joe Clark. And the vinyl edition itself is aimed squarely at collectors. A limited 180-gram blue pressing, reportedly limited to just 300 copies, with period imagery and historical material accompanying the music. But here's why I chose it. When I sampled these recordings, I heard that old fiddle and guitar sound, and I liked it. It's primitive compared with modern recordings, but it should be. Some of this music is literally a century old. But when you listen to it, you can hear pieces of what would eventually become country, bluegrass, and American roots music. And that's fascinating to me. This isn't just listening to an album, it's listening to a part of the history of recorded American music. 10 years ago, I probably would have scrolled right past something like this. Today, I want to hear it. And that may be the best example of why I'm doing this series in the first place. So there you are. Out of 374 vinyl releases on this week's list, 28 survived my initial lewd filter. I listened to further samples from those 28, and these are the 10 that intrigued me enough to share with you. Now I'm going to decide which of these albums I want to purchase digitally. Then I'm going to live with them for a little while, listen to the entire album, probably more than once, and find out whether my first impression was right. On a future show, I'll come back and review what I bought and what I thought. Maybe something I loved during the sampling process won't hold up over an entire album. Trust me, that's happened a few times since I started this. And maybe, just maybe, one of these albums will be good enough that I'll decide I don't just want the digital version, I want the record. That's when an album becomes vinyl worthy. And that's really the whole purpose behind this new series. I'm not trying to tell you what the best music is. I'm trying to find music. Music I haven't heard, artists I don't know, genres I haven't explored enough, and maybe some forgotten records from the past that deserve another listen. Let me know in the comments which of these 10 albums caught your attention. And if there's one you think I absolutely need to reconsider, tell me about that too. And if you enjoy coming along on this musical journey with me, please like the video, subscribe to the Senior Spinner channel, and ring that notification bell. Until next time, keep listening and keep spinning.